Let me see here. I have a couple notes before I get started, which might be helpful slash important. Um, as Simone mentioned, I gave a talk at Dusseldorf Kunstakademie's Sparta program earlier in the year. I should note that a version of that talk also happened at the University of Victoria in Canada late last year, over a year ago. So they deserve some credit for that as well. But that talk was called Things I'm Not Talking About, and it was about, as Simone said, it was about artists who write. And it really was my attempt to kind of get into the meaning of artists writing. Like, what does it mean when artists sort of take the sort of the discourse and the meanings and into their own hands, and start writing. And as such, I began sort of getting out of the realm of theory and more into kind of like the juicy guts of making art, which I think is something that is, I don't mean that only literally, obviously, like psychologically, politically, whatever, like what it means when the words about art come actually from somebody who has spent time trying to make the stuff. That was the point of that first talk. And this talk is getting into the nitty-gritty of what's to write about art, but in a different way. It's called The Pitch Writer, and it focuses on the kind of like sort of like behind the scenes of what it means to write about art, which is an insane kind of process, which gets very little airtime in art discourse, except in sort of very specific sort of academic work about precarious labor and stuff like that. So this is my attempt to kind of like write as a narrative, my ideas about what it means to write about art, and also to kind of work through the question why words now, or as I said to Simone while we were talking about doing this lecture, the question like why my words now, which is really like a big part of the process of, I think, writing, period, as with making art, is sort of asking yourself like, why me now, why my words now, etc. So I'm going to get into it pretty quickly. There's 6 sections in the story, so you can kind of follow the trajectory. It should, by the time I start talking, it should take about 45 minutes, hopefully even a little bit less. But you can track the progress through the six sections, which I'll flag as we go. It's written in sort of a colloquial style, so there's some foul language. I felt a pressure to highlight that at the beginning, so as not to catch anybody too off guard who might be listening. And there's kind of there's a strange change late in the piece from the first to the third person, and if you want later we can talk about why I did that. The last note is regards questions. I understand, I'm not sure what it's like actually forming questions after somebody basically reads a story. So I want to sort of, as I told Simone earlier, I want to kind of underline that although it would be totally wonderful if there are questions which specifically respond to what I'm about to say, that it's also completely permissible and good if the questions range further out from that into just like the relationship between art and words generally. So don't be stifled by the pressure to stay on theme. With that, I will begin. Section 0, Guts. I want to write about the relationship between words and art, like how that relationship really is. True enough, there's a judgment implied by that word really. Well, then I'll get it over with and air my intentions up front. I want to take momentary leave from ideas. So much the better to undertake this task. There have been many times when the relationship between art, ideas, and words has smashed my mind like atoms colliding. But just as many times, I've dwelled on ugly, down in the dirt, uncomfortable thoughts regarding the whole enchanting and sordid business. You can't write about what writing really is without writing through this conflict. Oh, you might periodically hear my cat making a ruckus. She's exercising. Part one, heavy lifting. One autumn afternoon in 2011, end of art school, I found myself walking down the sidewalk outside my apartment. Vancouver in winter is like the underside of a big wet blanket. Every breath is ice water slurped through cotton. On this day, the air was sweet with rain and leaf rot. Cars swished by in waves, their rumbles dampened by fir trees and rainforest air. As I walked, I obsessed over work. Although I did not know it then, these two activities were becoming synonymous. Magazine writing is brain and feeling labor, and that brain labor had begun to saturate every living moment. The takeover was total. It was like ocean water had somehow found a way to flow downstream, salifying lakes and rivers. Witness the psychological mechanisms of the neoliberal gig economy in action. You can't ever stop, but you also don't want to. It's a fucked up kind of love. Most of my thoughts had to do with pitches, and when they didn't have to do with pitches directly, they concerned the arguments and theories that would eventually feed pitches, thereby winning me writing commissions. Pitching is the wellspring of unpaid labor which fuels magazines. Without pitches, there are no reviews, no essays, no interviews, and in a sense, then, without pitches, there is no discourse. Desperately earnest, I was happy to oblige this service. I'd worked on my pitches for hours and hours before sending them to editors. As a result of this work, my emails affected an incredible brick wall confidence. But then I'd send the emails and the days would start ticking by without response. With each turning of the clock, one brick would fall away. In this way, over and over, it was revealed, to me more than anyone, that my brick wall confidence was just a facade. Over and again, I became convinced that through some faux pas, some misguided slip of language, some failure of decorum, I had revealed myself as a charlatan, a faker, a phony. This was not entirely a bad thing. There is, after all, a romance in fakery. Think Leonardo DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can. Think Orson Welles' as F is for Fake. In writing as in art, there is an element of make-believe at play. But make-believe is a dangerous game. You have to own that. You have to get used to it. It was that goddamned earnestness that jammed me up when my pitches went unanswered. I didn't know how to proceed. You should have seen me there, writhing on the floor like a spurned fling. I desperately wanted to write my editors. I wanted to explain, to plead for another chance. This usually doesn't happen to me, I would cry. I'm usually really good at this. On that particular day, walking down the sidewalk out front of my apartment, I was stewing over a pitch that I had recently sent to a new editor of mine. His name was David Wolf, and he ran a glossy magazine called Pediment. These are fictionalized things from real life. Like many writer-editor relationships, ours was limited to email correspondences. Our relationship was maddening in its combination of intimacy and distance. David and I would delve into finely nuanced conversations about voice, criticality, and description, and then, just as suddenly as it began, our communication would break off for months. It was no one's fault. That's just how magazine writing works. Writers take one another's places in an unending cycle as the editor struggles to give them the attention that we know or think we deserve. I certainly figured I deserved a lot. So what I'd do is include 4 or 5 pitches in one email. The idea was that the editor couldn't possibly reject them all. It was that thing about throwing many ideas at a wall. Something's bound to stick eventually. In the early days of pitch writing, I'd sit in a glass-walled cafe in Vancouver called Jerry's. I wish that I had kept a log of the hours I spent on Jerry's torn pleather seats. I could stretch one Americano out for like 5 hours. Every so often, I'd poke at the quilt going stale in front of my eyes. Sometimes I gazed out the window through the shifting reflections, the crystal skyscrapers downtown and the mountains behind them. Periodically, I fantasized about fame. I imagined how, in the distant future, my collected work might be published as a book. My pitch emails could be included in this book. Maybe they would even require a separate book. It could be called The Pitch Writer, big and thick like the Yellow Pages, a monument to failed ideas. There she is. At the same time that thinking was becoming labor, different orders of labor were mixing. For about a year, I'd get up at 5 a.m. and ride my bike through Vancouver. The streets were sometimes dry, but more often they were rain-slicked. On rare occasions, snow slush caused my skinny tires to slip and slide. After half an hour, I'd arrive at a construction site. The sites were Gothic skeletons made from concrete, steel, and endless cables. The sun's thin gray light would barely touch the unfinished tech centers and condominium complexes. Bare light bulbs dangled like torches. Watery gravel crunched underfoot, and work crunched bodies. From time to time, I stole away to capture a video of some sublime light pattern breaking the shadows. Which is to say, there were beautiful parts of that jump. One day, I heard Arabic singing. Following the sounds down a long plywood hallway, I found two men tarring a balcony. They used blowtorch to melt the sticky black pitch. Licorice fumes swirled around their heads. We chatted, and through those chats I learned that the men were Iraqi and that one of them had fought in the First Gulf War. As the old man talked, I thought about how I'd seen the subsequent wars on television. Throughout my teens and early 20s, I put myself to sleep with a tin can bong and cable television. I'd usually pass out around 3 o'clock in the morning in front of the cable news cycles. As I drifted off, eyes half open, the decomposing world would blend into my gauzy non-dreams. Pennsylvania sniper, Marines in Fallujah, Saddam pulled from hole, Katrina, sniper, Marines in Fallujah, sniper, Saddam, Marines. Often I'd wake up with food in the couch with me, cheese puffs, donut crumbs, an unfinished omelet. Soon after talking with the Iraqi men, I went down a set of freshly poured concrete stairs. Just then I heard a grinding sound. Looking upwards, I saw a circular line emerge on the concrete ceiling. Then everything went silent, and a gray cylinder fell through the air. It crashed to the floor like a mortar. Then it bounced once or twice, in slow motion, like how they show car crashes in movies. This site is bullshit, the guy said as we ate lunch downstairs in the building's damp basement. It's bullshit, the safety on this site. Someone's going to get killed. A few days later, paramedics rushed past me as I was hauling more cables. They left with one of the Iraqi men on a stretcher. His face was strapped into a ventilator. Passed out from the tar fumes, someone said. Part 2. Do you want me? One thing I remember very clearly is how it felt to wait for David's responses. Waiting, 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 waiting. The word I want to use is terror. Too strong, maybe. I mean, I'm talking about art here, not car bombs. But then again, maybe not. Because when we get down to the grist of the matter, I'm also talking about staying alive. In the head and heart, you know? The paradox of a magazine writing career like art making is that in absolutely colonizing your mind, it also keeps it alive. This is why pitching ideas to magazines feels just like pitching oneself to other human beings, terror and all. You can't pitch an idea without also pitching yourself. The idea is yourself. You become the work. Got to give the people what they want, and what they want is you, except when they don't. Pitching boils down to a simple question. Here is an idea I have just had. Would you like to have it? The question seems so utterly harmless, I'm almost embarrassed to have devoted so many words to it here, and yet so much hangs on it. I am a very confident person, you see. I must be to get all this writing done. Right? That's true. But then why do these questions keep looping incessantly through gray matter and flesh? So deep that I experience them not even as questions exactly, but instead as a roiling cortisol flow. If I had to translate that feeling, I'd make a list. Did I say something wrong? Am I too much? Am I enough? Did I get the context right? And then into the nitty gritty details. What about my voice? The pitch of my pitch? How is that? Fucking hell, here we go again. What if I say I love this thing, this artwork, this artist? What if I told you that I woke up at night thinking about it, thinking about them? Then would I have said too much, gone too far? And if I hate it and I tell you so, what then? Suppose I said I haven't thought about art all summer, and suppose I admitted how blissful this has been. So, too much? Too many questions? Now a recurring memory enters. An eminent poet is giving a talk somewhere, and I'm listening. The eminent poet quotes another poet who wrote incredibly, "You save me with your too much." I have searched for the origin of those 7 words probably 5 times and have never found them. Probably the eminent poet just made them up. Head swirling now inside the too much. That's it. That's the feeling. Same one that comes with waiting for the emails or text messages. Like a hormonal teenager with eyes drilled on those 3 little dots at the bottom of the screen. Dot, 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 dot. A cardiogram heartbeat, fucking terrifying. Except not a teenager for 18 years now, so what gives? Nerves frayed like piano wire, wanting to almost puke because shit, fuck, maybe I've really blown it this time. Opportunity gone, career too. That means life. But don't you dare let on, because that would definitely be the end. And maybe you can pull your fat from the fire if you just be cool, baby. Like you don't even care, which would be worse than anything. Part 3, love. Writing about art is these feelings. But here's the real catch. The fact that writing about art is these feelings in no way contradicts the fact that it is also a totally blissed out process of returning through words to things like this. Sitting in an old cedar building in Vancouver and becoming intoxicated by a dreamlike film. It was 2008, so right at the start of art school. On the screen, a woman was jogging through a rainy woodland. The jogger finds a cave. Soon afterwards, she approaches a house. Through this window, she sees a man, young and sculpted, skipping rope. What is this? In Switzerland, a few years later, walking through an enormous concrete cube like an alien cathedral, not yet angry at the wealth that builds places like this, and so free to wonder about the strange objects inside. Like, for instance, a very out-of-place gridded drain in the museum's polisher, and inside of that drain, an inexplicable waterfall. Sitting on the concrete steps outside of Vancouver's downtown public library and pulling out my laptop to read. In those early days, an absolute inability to stop reading about art. On that occasion, reading about a Belgian painter who wove paradoxes of European and familial history into canvases filled with washed out colors. Paintings becoming memory itself. Brain melting in the realization that an artwork could do this. Climbing stairs and arriving in a long and narrow room on the top of a building near the harbor, near the train tracks and the ocean liners and ziggurat shipping containers. Finding in that room many square paintings, each containing concentric rows of colored circles. Jaw agape at the finely tuned hues and the almost impossibly careful application of oil and pigment. And then, walking down the once industrial street outside of the gallery, the world's colors now changed. And then, not even realizing this transformation had happened until 11 years later, while writing these very words. Seeing for the first time an exhibition by the photographer and writer who I would become obsessed by. Sufficiently enamored with her work to hunt down the show's curator, the artist's friend, in Toronto. Nerves screaming. Walking with the curator through a neo-Victorian greenhouse, learning how he took a job in an AIDS clinic so that he could do whatever the fuck I want with my art. And also about how art exhibitions don't have to have beginnings and ends. Warmth. Putting on a DVD from the art school library, the realization afterwards of the life-changing content within this plastic disc. In the video, actors playing a camp high school musical, painted like vampires and Elvis Presley impersonators and go-go dancers, all fueled by acid. The feeling of your culture's collective unconscious consolidated within the screen. A few years later, the feeling of hearing about this artist's suicide. The confused heartbreak. Back in the art school library, pulling random DVDs from the stack based on their cover and their titles, like how I still choose my wine. Bringing the DVDs home to my bachelor apartment and watching them alone. On one of those discs, an artwork called I, Jedi, containing a still shot of a cliff with classical music playing over the top. Only that. Thinking, what the fuck is this shit? And then going back for more. Part 4, Berlin, 2010. By the time I started working with David, I had already been writing for Pediment for 2 years. It was summer 2010 in Berlin, where I'd been on an ill-fated art school exchange semester. Although there were many delicious morsels in that summer, it had been very difficult, unexpectedly so. What started as a fantasy of European pilgrimage devolved into a big soup of depressed and mistranslated everything. One day, in an effort to wrest some goodness from this summer lost to my collapsing mind, I decided to write. More specifically, I decided to get myself published. That summer, minor technological disasters accented the psychological ones. One day, my laptop screen died. My landlord, a massively depressed ex-American, told me to go see her computer repair guy. His name was Ulrich, and he ran a shop across the street from the flat where I rent a room in Friedenau, a southern Berlin. It was the kind of place that you can imagine not existing the next time you pass by, like a junk shop in a children's ghost story. But Ulrich was real, and did a certain kind of a good job, made all the better when he didn't ask for money. He pulled an enormous antique tube monitor from a pile of old computer parts. Then he used a thick cream-colored input cable to attach the monitor to my dying Toshiba laptop. On this setup, I crafted 2 sample reviews of Berlin art exhibitions. I doted over them for days and weeks, adding and subtracting description, trimming floral adverbs, and reinstating them when the trimming went too far. It was bliss, one of the true loves of my life. Eventually, I sent the resultant works of criticism to a few unwitting editors, like fishhooks. Most of the editors ignored me, but I did get 2 bites. As a result of this effort, I was invited by an editor named Christina Long, David's European counterpart at Pediment, to contribute to the magazine. This meant that I could pitch ideas for reviews of art exhibitions and that the editors would generally consider them. This was much better than letting the emails disappear underneath the ever-growing mountain of unread subject lines that is an editor's inbox. So that's how my career as a pitch writer got started. Part 5. Daniela, Berlin, 2017. These days, people sometimes refer to me as a successful writer. They say, "You're doing so well." And I appreciate it, I really do. Though I'd be lying if I said I didn't also feel confused. It's true that I have sometimes found myself in the same room as very powerful people. There was that time with Bono, but that's too long a story to tell here. And then there was Daniela, my new German tax accountant. Daniela the powerful. Daniela the cruel and merciful angel. Daniela's office is in Charlottenburg, in former West Berlin. I used to kind of loathe this area for its haughtiness. At the same time, I have entertained fantasies there. This probably explains the loathing. Charlottenburg was the childhood home of Walter Benjamin, the renegade Jewish critic whose life Hannah Arendt described as a tour de force of bad luck. When I was in art school, Benjamin became such a popular reference amongst overzealous art man-children like myself that it became obnoxious to even mention his name. Most North Americans just said Benjamin with an English J, but the more pretentious amongst us opted for the German Aussprache. Benjamin, we'd say, daydreaming of Europe. While walking through Charlottenburg, my unconscious wandered into certain reveries. Sometimes I would imagine turning down the right avenue at just the right moment, and there it would be, the scent of the fragrant baked apple, the very same baked apple that Benjamin himself so fondly recalled from his Berlin childhood. Sometimes I even fantasized that the transcendently misunderstood writer might himself appear, and what is more, that he might appear in my own body, that I might be him, that he would be me. One sunny summer day in early 2018, I rode my bike to Daniela's office to clear some things up. At issue was my barely existent writer's income. When I arrived, she wavered between accusing me of fraud and suggesting that I was just an idiot. The amount is very low, she said, in response to papers documenting my 2017 income. You know that you have to declare all of it, right? An angry embarrassment spread through me, because I had every last penny, from the payment for a catalog essay written for the Luxembourg Pavilion at that year's Venice Biennale, at about 1,000 euro, my fattest payday yet, to the 50 and 150 euro scraps that I'd been paid for exhibition reviews. Calming myself, I responded. I described the heroic lengths of temperance to which I'd gone to pursue a life of the pen. It was a life made of peanuts, tuna fish, pita bread, and tahini, all washed down by 70-cent bottles of beer that tasted of cigarette butts. I didn't mind living on the cheap like this, I made sure to emphasize. Actually, I kind of liked it. What I didn't like was feeling like a fool. I offer an in-person meeting, Daniela had told me after I first emailed her to request help with my taxes. This didn't seem necessary, and so I wrote her back. Hi, Daniela. It seems to me that because my economic situation is quite simple, that an in-person meeting won't be necessary. But that wasn't the whole truth. In reality, my thoughts went something like this. Hi, Daniela. Thank you for your kind offer. Unfortunately, I currently find myself in the grip of a pathological frugality. Some people say I'm cheap, but I find a more noble purpose in my inability to spend money. In any case, the point is that I hate parting with cash. I will do almost anything to avoid it. Therefore, in the anticipation that you will likely charge an exorbitant fee for your time, and that you will not tell me this in advance, and that I will be unable, due to an overwhelming fear of even talking about money, to clarify this with you, will unfortunately not be able to come to your office. Thank you again for your services. About a week after I sent Daniela a rat's nest folder of invoices, she sent them back to me, disgusted. It's a mess, she said. Everything's wrong. It all needs to be fixed. Many weeks passed, and the shambolic disaster had been straightened out. Thereafter, I sat in Daniela's office, tail dangling between my legs. We talked about life in Berlin and her work as a volunteer firefighter. Then we addressed the demonic terror of filing taxes. In the end, we spent maybe 5 minutes talking about mine. Before leaving her office, I finally broached the dreaded topic. "So, I must owe you some money?" I asked. She just waved her hand. 6. The elevator pitch, or the dissociative moment. On the day that Michael accessed Craig's video online, he was sitting in the cafeteria at Berlin's National Library. A bowl of potato soup sat in front of him on the triangular plastic tray, along with six packages of pepper. Michael had mastered the ordering of soup in German, but today things had gone wrong. He'd been daydreaming as the customer in front of him ordered, so he was caught off guard when the woman working the counter called for him. He had seen her almost every weekday for the past year, but did not know her name. She was a short Vietnamese German woman with straight black hair. During and after the Vietnam War, Vietnamese refugees had fled to East Germany as temporary laborers. The deal was that they were supposed to leave after a few years, but many of them stayed, of course. Except for the librarians, who seemed solidly middle class, the library staff, including the cafeteria personnel and security guards, was a cross-section of Berlin's working class, minus the Turkish and Arabic. Like the others who worked at the cafeteria, several late middle-aged white women, and 2 young black men who ferried dishes and rarely spoke, this Vietnamese woman wore a white polo-style shirt. The shirts were made from a cheap polyester blend, and each had a bright red stripe near the shoulder, which held the company name, Sodexo. Bitte, bitte, the small woman behind the counter asked Michael. She strained her face and half shouted to break through the plexiglass between them. He sputtered under pressure before finally forcing it out in German. Ich hätte gern ein Kartoffelsuppe. All it took was a little surprise to rattle the script. The Sodexo worker clarified his order. Kartoffelsuppe? Ah, genau, bitte, Kartoffelsuppe, bitte. Welches groß? Tasse, oder? Terrine, bitte. Little currents of self-flagellation rolled silently in his head as his carefully rehearsed German collapsed. Stupid, still stupid. Now he sat there regaining his composure. Stirring pepper into the soup, he opened the YouTube video of Craig's lecture. Craig makes his living as a motivational speaker and career coach. He wears the haircut of a boy groping for maturity. It is sandy brown and short, and at the front rises into a little wave, which breaks over his pink forehead. The cowlick is almost certainly reinforced with gel or some sort of wax product, and it sends a message. Craig might have just rolled out of bed, but don't worry, he's in control even when he's not. This man-child knows how to sell himself, Michael thought, as he watched Craig speak, pacing back and forth across the screen. At least, Craig knows how to show you how to sell yourself. That's why he gets paid the big bucks. Today, Craig is speaking to a lecture hall of music students at a small university in the United States. He's telling the students about the art of the elevator pitch. Craig's words command attention because they are very charming. As he notices this, Michael thinks suddenly of murder, but knows it is unlikely that Craig has done such a thing. Once in a while, the lecture veers unexpectedly off course, but even these brushes with failure seem like part of the show, because you never really doubt that Craig will steer his words, his own pitch, back on track. A self-deprecating quip is all it takes to regain the audience. But there is another reason, Michael notices, that Craig's words command attention. Namely, there is absolutely nothing else about Craig that could possibly distract from them. Sure, he's handsome-ish, but he's also basically forgettable, just like his off-the-rack navy blazer, sky blue dress shirt, khaki slacks, silver watch, and wedding ring. Michael tries to imagine Craig becoming uncomfortable in any environment and can't. That's confidence, boy. At the same time, it's hard to imagine Craig actually being in any environment, including this lecture theater. As convincing as he is, he's not there at all. His smoothness, inclusive of his exquisite awkwardness, is finely polished, like a pasty smiling ghost. At first, Michael figured Craig for an idiot. Or not an idiot exactly, but a two-bit snake oil peddler. That was until he noticed himself listening a little too closely, taking very seriously Craig's wisdom on how to deliver the pitch, how to sell the idea, how to cast the spell. So he thinks to himself, almost without knowing he's thinking it, that's how you get the job done. That's how the pitch lands. It was as if parallel processes were running in Michael's brain. There was the part of his mind that thinks it knows how things are, like how this guy Craig is a deceitful bullshit artist. And then just beneath that layer of thinking was another. In this slightly hidden layer, Michael had begun notating Craig's points, logging little tips about how to sell his own ideas, articles about art, exhibition reviews, ideas for interviews and books. Shit, Michael said to himself almost involuntarily. That's a pretty good idea. Maybe I could use that. I know I could use that. The trick was to be confident, but not aggravatingly so. That was the balance in which success hung. When Michael became conscious of his doubled perception of Craig, the realization came as a bit of a shock, but only a bit. This thing about the brain doing multiple, seemingly contradictory jobs at once had become routine. And anyway, this guy Craig was clearly onto something. It didn't really matter if his advice worked. The point was that he was the one up there dispensing it. At the moment, Craig, the motivational speaker, is illustrating a particularly important point. He does so by recalling a conversation with a business student who presumably attended a previous version of this same motivational seminar. So I was talking with an MBA business student, Craig says to the music students in front of him. And I said, so, tell me a little bit about yourself. What is your greatest accomplishment? This is important information to include in any pitch, especially an elevator pitch. Craig says as much to the attentively watching students before returning to his anecdote about the business student. His magic emanates from a masterful incongruity. The transitions between his telling of the story and his engagement with the present audience are at once sharply enunciated and impossibly smooth. There is no space for interruption or confusion. The information flows from his mouth like a daisy chain. He returns to the business student. So I said, what's your most meaningful accomplishment? And the business student says to me, well, here Craig pauses, emphasizing a moment of indecision in the business student's response. Whereas the business student delayed his answer because of anxious nerves, Craig delays because he understands the power of language's negative space. He wields it like a conductor's wand. Then finally the business student responds. I graduated in 3 years, he says finally to Craig. To which Craig replies, me too. Fingers are splayed lightly across his chest, conveying surprise and pleasure at this moment of sympathy between him and the business student. Me too, he repeats. Me too. But the moment of mutual identification is only a foil. Craig has an ulterior motive, and this is where his lecture gets deceptively vicious. He wants to underline the banality of the business student's accomplishment. In this way, he will push the students, both the business student and the music students, to find more effective language with which to make their accomplishments more meaningful to the listener. And so, Craig replies to the business student's boast. So what? The two words are a punch delivered with a silk glove. With words, Craig has moved like a boxer, baiting the student with a feinted moment of sympathy before delivering a crashing right cross. You can almost see the business student's sweat glands opening, their face going red. This is tough love. But in the end, it will make the pitch better, stronger, more convincing. In the end, it will sharpen the student's confidence, take the edge off their nerves. So Craig punches again. He repeats the words, "So what?" At this point, Craig turns his palms to the sky and flares them out at his sides like a cheeky bird. The tremendous force of his condescension is delivered smooth like physical comedy. Repeating the "so what," Craig focuses on the letter A. Almost involuntarily, he stretches that letter out. By way of this slight adjustment of a vowel, the question becomes playfully snarky, and the punches land harder. So what? So what? With that, Craig turns back to his real-life audience, the music student. For all intents and purposes, they have become equivalent to the business students who Craig usually speaks to. Michael watches, glued to the screen by the magnetic force of a doubled emotional response. On the one hand, he's revolted by smarmy Craig. On the other hand, he's captivated. The two hands work together whether he likes it or not. The students on the screen were learning how to sink the hook, how to deliver the pitch. And so was he. And with that, I finish and turn it back over to the rest of you.